Jane is wandering around the dental offices. She seems so anxious. Is there something wrong with her? Oh, one of her teeth is missing. She's thinking about all the horrible things that might happen. It looks horrible to me, too. Oh my, he must be a doctor. Why don't we see what he has to say? The dental office doesn't seem so scary. Jane is talking to the doctor. Oh my, she can't stop thinking about that scary knife. If he is not lying, maybe surgery without using a knife is possible. He even showed a picture, so it must not be a lie. I hope.
A very good morning to everyone. I am Dr. Mukund Gupta. I am an oral and maxillofacial surgeon practicing in Delhi NCR and Muradabad. Um, these pictures are of my teachers, without whom I would not be in a position at this place. I'd like to also thank DO India for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this webinar initiative in the times of Corona crisis. Friends, today we are going to discuss regarding atrophic ridges and the surgical challenges that are associated with the same. Briefly, we are going to touch upon topics of sinus lift, zygomatic implants, pterygoid implants, some periosteal implants, and ridge splits. If we look back at how the ridges tend to resolve, Atwood in 1963 gave a beautiful classification categorizing the alveolar ridge atrophy into 6 criteria. Of point of concern in discussion is for today are the classification of ridges that fall in class 3 to class 6. Immediately post extraction or when with an immediate implant loading, we generally do not end up with a significant challenge with regards to either the height or the width for implant placement. Problem starts as on later dates mostly, unless and until the arch is previously very well deformed, which does not permit us for a good aesthetic implant placement and related prosthesis. So mostly what we are worried about surgically are ridges where there is compromise in height as well as width, or the combination, delayed or late post extractions. The classification was modified in 2004 by Rustia, who had given again a good classification, which was more concerned with the in-time prosthetic rehabilitation. They took into account the challenges that we would face not just to place an implant, but also to prosthetically rehabilitate the patient. In itself, it included how best we can aesthetically, functionally, mechanically, as well as with the gingival biotypes, how we can rehabilitate a patient. As such, most of the individuals that fall in type 2 or type 3, they are challenging to rehabilitate surgically in a good manner. So these all fall into the criteria of discussion in today's topic. Bone density classically based on Hounsfield unit. Uh, Now we do not actually put that much emphasis into the Hounsfield criteria. We rather than go with the structural criteria forwarded by the CBCT guidelines. However, broadly speaking, a D4 density bone is not ideal for placement. Neither is the D1 category. Both have their set of challenges. So the ideal bones are D2 and D3, but most often in maxilla we come across bones, especially in posterior maxilla, bones that are either D3 or D4. So we have to improvise, change, and adapt, or use techniques which would help in a good implant placement with regards to primary stability as well as long-term survival, and with a prosthetic or occlusal rehabilitation in mind. Prevention is always better than cure. So I urge everybody to focus so much upon the extractions, especially with regards to with regards to any patient for whom you have prosthetic rehabilitation in mind. be it of any kind. It could be implant supported prosthesis, it could be a removable prosthesis. We must always give patient an option and highlight the importance of restoring or rehabilitating whatever amount of bone that we would have post extraction. The longer the time span from extraction after extraction when we are rehabilitative patient, the higher the amount of resorption. The best preservation is the cortical margins. So when we are doing an extraction, if it is as atraumatic as possible, the actual cortical boundaries of the tooth socket help in preserving the maximum amount of height. Covering the sockets have significantly better amount of cancellous bone in the intervening segments that has been shown over time. We can also use multiple kinds of demineralized or freeze-dried bone graft along with various kinds of membranes in order to preserve whatever bone volume that we can immediately after the extraction. As such, this gives the patient opportunity at a later date and reduces the risk of or challenges that we face when we are doing an implant rehabilitation. Surgical correction of atrophied ridges generally requires systematic approach towards management. We have to be very particular as in what kind of defects are we talking of. Are we actually dealing with vertical rehabilitation challenge ridges or horizontally challenged ridges, or most of the time as we come across in our clinical practices, are these challenges combined? The most common vertically challenged ridge rehabilitation that we come across in our clinical practice is the posterior maxilla, wherein because of sinus pneumatization, there is significantly less amount of vertical bone, far less from the ideal that is available for a good implant placement. So the most common procedure that is adapted is the sinus lift. What is basically a sinus lift? If we were to look on the screen, if there is dipping of the sinus due to significant pneumatization, the amount of vertical height in an edentulous area is significantly less. A sinus lift procedure basically helps in lifting the sinus from its inferior position to a higher position. The place of lift is occupied by a bone graft and can be later utilized or immediately utilized by placement of implant. This is the actual sinus lift procedure. So, what are the three or four challenges that we come across? The first question that arises when considering sinus lift is, how significant is the height restriction? As in, what is the actual height available to us before we will reach the sinus? That is the first question. Second, if we are going to increase the height or we are going to lift the sinus, what is the kind of technique that we should go about? Would it be an open approach requiring a complete exposure of the sinus membrane, or also called as direct sinus lift, or we can get away with minimally invasive surgeries through indirect sinus lift, where we are not actually exposing the entire sinus lining in an open environment, we are going just through the socket. Third, what kind of bone graft should we be placing, and what are the advantages or disadvantages of all those things? We are slowly and briefly going to discuss all the same here. Now, how do we assess what is the actual sinus position? As such, intraoral periapical radiographs can be significantly challenging because of the positional errors that we come across. Even when doing parallelogram techniques, we will not get a fair idea. So they are out of the questions with regards to posterior maxilla. There are multiple studies which have been put forward wherein they have compared how a sinus topography is available or appears on panoramic images, orthopanoramic images, or a cone beam CT scan. As such, CBCT is the gold standard, and I would urge everybody who is placing even a single implant to do rely on these investigation methodology. For whatever reason, if CBCT is not available in the vicinity in your area and you are having to work with panoramic images. There is this beautiful article which correlates the basic topography of orthopantomographic images with CBCT images, which you should look upon. You can clearly see the type of bone diagrammatic representation of what we see on an OPG and how it is on the CBCT. So this can be used as a basic template, but it is not the most ideal way when going about rehabilitating with implants. We should always rely on a good standard CBCT image and assessment when planning for an implant procedures. A This is a meta-analysis article put up in the International Journal of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery, which talks about the basic guidelines. Broadly speaking, we have to categorize differentiate between a completely edentulous, a long span edentulous arch from a single tooth or two tooth or partially edentulous arches. The challenges are significantly more in a completely edentulous case with an enlarged sinus compared to a single tooth rehabilitations. Previous guidelines, they would suggest that if there is a single tooth edentulous space with the height of approximately 6 to 8 millimeter of bone, you can go ahead and do a good indirect sinus lift and immediate implant placement. For anything less, they always suggest an open sinus lift procedure. However, with changing times, with guided surgeries, this figure of less than 8, we have got down almost up to 3 millimeters. So for a single tooth edentulous space, single or a couple of tooth edentulous space, when the bone height is in the region of 3 to 7 millimeters, provided the density of bone is good, we can think of going ahead with a crestal approach for indirect sinus lift in current era of guided surgeries, which we have done in many cases using guided surgery by DO. Having said that, when as the available bone height decreases, the surgical challenges increase. As such, for anything with less than 5 millimeter of bone, we have to be very careful when using an indirect sinus lift. In a long span edentulous arch, it is always better when the height is less than 5 millimeter to go ahead and do a direct sinus lift. Armamentarium are basic surgical kits and specific sinus surgery improvements. I am particularly fond of these curettes, which are which help in sinus floor elevation, and these kits vary from places to places and surgical preferences. This is the kit generally which I use for direct sinus lift cases, and it has all these nicks and crannies and angulations which help in easy lifting of the cases. The classic technique per se was of the Summers. Summers technique was the one which is basically the concept of indirect sinus lift. In cases of indirect sinus lift, as per the Summers technique, we are going to conserve as much osseous tissue as possible. The advantage of indirect sinus lift using osteotome is the density of the surrounding bone also increases, because when we are compacting the osteotome, there is lateral spread of bone. So a D4 bone can become a D3 bone. A D3 bone can become a D2 bone because of lateral compaction. As such, it is far less traumatic and has significantly lesser risk of infection. In the classic Summer technique, we are not using any kind of rotary drills. So there is no heat generation. Therefore, the viability of osteoblast is significantly more. As such, this allows for a significantly improved tactile sensation. So what is this basic Summer technique? This technique relies on osteotomes which sequentially need to be put up and which do not have any chiseling end at the back. These can be used to basically lift the sinus membranes up. We basically diagrammatically explaining you what happens in in the indirect sinus lift by these osteotome techniques. Sequential osteotomes are used. When we are using the sequential osteotome, as we go towards the sinus floor, we keep on first the density feel is very evident through your tactile sensation. As we reach the floor, the density increases. It increases to an extent where we can actually hear also the sound changes. Once we are close to the floor, we have to basically break off that cortical boundary, and sometimes in cases we do not even break it. Because of the elasticity of the tissue, some amount of sinus gets lifted up. It's an excellent technique, requires a little bit of mastery and explaining the patient that a lot of taps are going to be used. As we see through these images, a density of bone through the cancellous area is significantly changed from image 1 to the image 4. Because of these osteotomes, the osteoblast or the cancellous marrow shifts laterally also. So this is the area which is getting lifted up, but the lateral area, the osteoblast or the cancellous bones are moving laterally, which is significantly increasing the density of the bone. This helps eventually in having a significantly more primary stability. There are various newer advances that are available with regards to non-cutting surgical drills, which are also available with DO. They basically cut only laterally, and when they reach the top, they are actually helping us in lifting the sinus without a cutting edge. So these can be used to lift up the cortical floor of the sinus, therefore which allowing us for placement of the implants. This is how these help us in raising the sinus floor. Comparing an indirect sinus lift, here is an example of a case of direct sinus lift. This case has we can actually see significantly less amount of bone. At that time, I did not have access to CBCT, so I had used orthopantomogram only. The basic lateral approach is used in these cases. Here we are going to make a window on the lateral aspect of the maxilla. Various instruments can be used for creating these windows. Here I am using a normal surgical round burr. If later on when I had access to piezotomes, I have used those also, and we can use any which way. Basically this involves creating a lateral window and being extremely gentle with regards to elevation of the sinus lining. The sinus lining has to be gently moved away from the bony margins and then subsequently lifted. Here is an image of a piezotome which helps in significantly lesser amount of cuts. Now this window or the lateral boundary that we have used, many a cases we can basically trim the margins of these windows and insert it to act as a cortical floor to the sinus lining that has been lifted up. I'll show the diagrammatic image now. An area of very small tear like this, should it be a cause of worry? Many a times if we are getting a perfect sinus surgery through direct sinus approach, we will not have this tear. But many a times a small tear like this is inconsequential. At this stage also, after lifting or elevating this, the chip that I was previously talking of, the lateral window, we can basically use to seal this area with that, or we can use various adhesive materials that we are going to talk of. Once that is in place, once that membrane is lifted up, if the height of the bone or the quality of bone was good enough, we can place an implant immediately. If this available bone height was significantly less, we can actually just lift the sinus without placing an implant and just give bone grafts. The lateral window that we had taken off can be used to cover off or seal that sinus area which is depicted in this image. We can basically put on additional bone grafts in this area that will help in further integration. This is the post-op radiograph of that patient fully. Now, just as we discussed, there is a misconception. We need not use always a buccal vestibular approach or a lateral approach through the buccal aspect only. There are significant number of reports which are available through which we can actually access a sinus through the palatal approach. What are the basic advantages that we have with this? Basically, the amount of contraction that we have is significantly less. This allows for immediate loading of the implants significantly better as far as these research have reported. The possible challenges, this is the image where the palatal flap is raised and a lateral approach has been used. Palatal approach has been used for sinus lifting. Piezoelectric device is significantly better in such cases because this gives us a significantly better control over the osteotomy sites and minimizes the amount of bone loss. What are the limitations of using a palatal approach for direct sinus lift? Basically, the lateral augmentation, what we mean by lateral is, if we have a horizontal defect also along with the ridge on the buccal aspect, we cannot change that with the palatal approach. So this is ideally used for isolated vertical defects and it has got no role in horizontal augmentation on the buccal aspect. There is high risk of injury to, in case of high palatal vaults, this is significantly more challenges as the access to our instruments is not proper. There is risk of injury to the greater palatal artery, obviously because they are running very close to that area. And many patients complain of palatal paresthesia once a palatal flap has been raised, which is very discomforting for a few of them. What makes these sinus surgeries so challenging? There are multiple septae that are that could be present. A septum, what is a basic septum? A septum is basically defined as a strut of bone that is at least 2.5 millimeter in height. They could be varied in locations. They could be present at the top or roof or laterally medially. Now these septae present specific challenges. These are extremely difficult to negotiate when we are going for an indirect approach, because these septae, once if they are coming in our surgical line, will have extremely hard cortical boundaries and they are very difficult to negotiate. In such cases, it is always ideal to go with a lateral approach and an open or direct sinus lift approach. Through the reports, there are various technical knickknacks which I have picked up and I would like to share with you people. When we are lifting a sinus through a direct sinus approach or an indirect approach, if we were to use a suction, this is basically a Yanker suction tube which is put in the nostril. This case was being done under GA. I have used this technique even under local anesthesia after taking consent with the patient. So if a negative pressure is applied through the nostrils, the sinus membrane tends to lift off from the bony margins. So this prevents any risk of injury to the sinus membrane when we are creating a window, and is helpful when lifting the sinus membrane. Basically, this minimizes our direct manipulation of the sinus membrane, because in many cases the membrane is very closely adherent to the bony walls, especially in case of chronic sinusitis. The next question that I always used to ask, what happens next once we have lifted the sinus? What kind of bone graft that we should be using? Well, I am currently preferring for inlay cavity like indirect sinus lift Nova bone putty, which is easily available and accessible to us, because many a times patients do not agree for autogenous grafting for the valid reasons of donor site morbidities and pain and a second surgical site, which is very difficult for them to have. But there has been significant amount of discussions. This is a separate discussion topic per se, but I am putting forward what are the basic evidences which I have come across, which I have been using in my surgical practices. For very large sinus lifts, obviously the autogenous bone remains the gold standard, because it gives us both osteoconductive and osteogenic, period. So if we have a significantly large edentulous span, significantly large direct sinus lift, a general anesthesia procedure where we could harvest good amount of iliac crest bone, that is the gold standard. But for small defects, for indirect sinus lifts where the significant amount of graft increase is not required, we can go ahead with alloplastic alternatives as well. There are basic reports wherein after lifting the sinus membrane, you need not put a bone graft at all. Gel foam itself helps in formation of bone graft. This is, I'm quoting from the specific articles. there could be no bone formation. There could be new bone formation even with the peripheral vascular or venous blood. Basically, this is talking about use of platelet-rich fibrins, platelet-lip adhesives, and they have also shown to have significantly more large amount of growth. If we were to look closely, small membrane perforations, if they happen, should we worry? I don't think so, because as I told you, we can use the cortical boundary, that bone that we had taken out of window, to cover these defects. Small tears can also be managed very well with these help of cyanoacrylate glues that are available. Large perforations is a point of concern, because a large perforations makes a graft open to various environments through the nasal cavity or nasal passage. There is a significant amount of increased risk of failure of the graft and subsequent infections. So small tears, we need not worry. Medium-sized tears, now there is no specific definition or criteria which classifies a small perforation or a large perforation. It has to be, it's a very subjective thing. Using of small guided membranes or collagen membranes to cover small to medium sized defects can also be used as an alternative. That all is a subjective thing. In my practice, small tears, I have gone ahead and used bone grafts. I have also used cyanoacrylate glues to cover these small defects. Medium sized defect, I have not gone ahead with bone grafting much, but in couple of cases I did use a collagen membrane and the results were good enough, appreciably good enough. If we have the liberty, if the patient is willing enough, we can use calvalier bone grafts also instead of iliac crest, because they have significantly good amount of cortical bone, which helps in increasing the density of volume in that region and helps in primary stability of the grafts also. Here is another article that I have come across, where they have compared the bone regeneration in Silas Rift through tissue engineered or alloplastic bone and iliac crest bone. They were of the opinion that autologous cancellous bone is significantly better, as seen on the left side, and compared to tissue engineered bone, which is acceptable. As per reports, the Schneiderian membrane itself has significantly good uh, osteogenic potential. So once we have just lifted the membrane and even left that area open with small amount of blood, that itself has good amount of osteogenic potential. That can also lead to bone formation. We may not need significant amount of bone grafts. Through again, this is again article published in British Journal of Oral Maxillofacial Surgery, which say for small defects, hydroxyapatite is the best alternative, and autogenous and bovine bones follow for small defects. And they have considered all parameters as to patient comfort, longevity, implant survival rates, as well as the amount of bone loss. Here are the few of the alternatives available in the market, which are easily available, where we can use cytoplasm membrane. We can construct a good platelet-rich fibrin membrane that can be used to cover a sinus membrane tear or a sinus perforation. This is a beautiful example or image that first convinced me to use these cyanoacrylate glues. For small defects, look how beautifully a cyanoacrylate glue can cover the membrane defect and help us in utilization of the bone grafts. The advantages, basically, uh, they are extremely inexpensive. They are autogenous fibrin adhesives. They are fast acting. They help. They work in the presence of moistures also, and can be used in variable amounts in different cases. If we are doing a procedure, you should always be aware of its complications. There are obviously going to be intraoperative, postoperative complications. The one biggest preoperative complication is not assessing the patient compliance. Midway during the procedure, if the patient is not very compliant with the surgery, especially when you are doing local anesthesia based sinus lifts, it becomes extremely challenging in managing such cases. the complications as listed on the left side with their treatment. Small graft exposures need not worry, but if you have covered the defects well, we should not have this kind of problem. Small grafts we can basically keep on preventing a amount of infection, keep on areas irrigating the areas infection free, use antiseptic mouthwash also. There can be basically post-operative edema, swelling, infections, intraoperative bleeding, heaviness in nose, and the basic. I always prefer giving a good sinus surgery regimen to all patients, which includes a group of antihistamines, steam inhalation post-operatively, and along with basically Carvol Plus. In case we expect a little bit of discharge, if there is a small sinus tear, make the patient aware. We can advise various over-the-counter nasal sprays like Otrivin, which helps in managing the patient better. These are one of the rare complications that I have basically come across through various literatures that I have seen. We should always be aware of these situations. These are alarming and basically not very. It looks bad on fair-skinned individuals. Can happen. Should always be in our mind, but should not deter us from doing the sinus lift procedures. There could be tissue emphysema because we have opened the sinus. If the membrane is perforated, there could be tissue emphysema. There could be ecchymosis of all the skin. If there is, especially if the patient is on anticoagulant therapy, we should be aware of this mind. All this requires is proper counseling, antibiotic therapy to prevent any risk of secondary infections, and it should all take up. Now there is an interesting case report where the sinus was lifted, and the graft was put so much that it blocked the ostium sites also. It got displaced, it blocked the ostium sites also. This required a functional endoscopic sinus surgery for enlargement of the ostium so that the sinus linings and membrane could be cleared off. To prevent all these surgical challenges with various advancements, there are various water lift systems that are available, and they have been evaluated significantly by various authors. Multiple techniques of water lift systems have been available, and they have shown significant improvements. DO itself uses a hydraulic based mechanisms of lifting the sinus, and I find it extremely good. So this is one of the cases which I had done, initial cases of indirect sinus lift I had done with DO. Even though, as we can see, the amount of bone was significantly less, the challenging cases, even with 3 millimeters of bone, we were able to do indirect sinus lift for 2 implant cases. This is the basic protocol that we had for the sinus lift. The best thing that I found with DO was the meticulous manner in which the report was given to us, and I didn't find any problem in following the basic drill guides and sequences. Even though number may be more, but it gives more confidence to me as well as the patient that there is not a big incision. For a patient, getting stitches, getting cuts, not receiving an implant at the end of the sinus lift is a big thing. So it is much more comfortable for the patient. Basically, how does the procedure goes is, after the guide is put up, we can follow the drilling sequences. We can check for the floor through the help of the retractors and guides, and use this water based system. In fact, we are also, when we are following the DO system, they also give the amount of saline that needs to be used while doing the sinus lift. What is to be checked in all cases is how is the backflow of the hydraulic system. If there is a puncture in the lifting of the sinus membrane, we do get some air bubbles in it. But if the sinus lift is good and there has not been any perforation, the amount of saline that has been injected comes out beautifully at the end without any air bubbles, as we would just see in this video of mine. We have to be sure that the boundary of the lifting device or hydraulic system is very well anchored to the tissue, so that there is no airspace happening at that region. This is the prosthetic phase of the same patient. Now, there are various comparisons between indirect sinus lift and direct sinus lift which are available, and I, for one, believe that each has its own place. I prefer, with the coming of guided surgeries, even with challenging cases, I have gone as low as 3 millimeters for a single or two implant case. But for more than two implants and less than 5 millimeter of bone, I mostly prefer direct sinus lifts. To conclude, for sinus lift, the evaluation of the amount of vertical bone available is critical. CBCT is the gold standard. Less than 4 millimeter gives poor results, especially when going only with indirect lifts. Direct sinus lifts are much better. Greater than 8 or 9 mm of available vertical bone, the results are excellent, especially with indirect sinus lift. Knife edge ridge, it is always better to go with a lateral window approach where we can lift the vertical height as well as do a horizontal augmentation. Moving further, to avoid the sinuses, obviously there are multiple changes that are available. I, for one, no, I'm not significant with the good advantages that we have with the guided surgery. I have been able to manage most of the cases through conventional all-on-6 implants. But there are definitely cases as challenging as this, which require angulated implants, all-on-4 solutions that we are available. So, what is basically an all-on-4 solution? All-on-4 solution is where the sinus volumes are extremely thin, even with direct sinus lift. If the patient is not willing for autogenous grafting and we are sure that it's going to fail with alloplastic bone grafts, we go ahead and negate the sinuses and rehabilitate the arch with the help of all-on-4 implants. What are the other alternatives? The other alternatives are zygomatic implants. Example of zygomatic implants placed. So basically, the sinuses, we can go through the sinus or through a lateral window approach. Herein, the sinus is not lifted. The actual anchorage or support for this implant is coming from the zygomatic complex body, which is significantly dense compared to a maxillary bone. Even though this lever or this lever arm or torque is significantly more generated for this distance, but these do have shown significantly good results. We should be very clear about the anatomy of the zygomatic complex bone, the areas of support that we are going to take up from. We have to be sure of the various foraminas that are present, such as the frontozygomatic or the infraorbital foramina, or the zygomatic arch, or the concavo-convex curves that we have at the zygomatic maxillary buttress before we attempt to do these implants. This is a basic guideline as to what is the ideal line which could be used for placement of the implants. This placement along this line will prevent any injury to the uh, pterygopalatine fossa components or the orbital components, and will help us in placing the implants in the guided positions. There have been numerous studies that are available which have considered various approaches, as in crestal approach or palatal approach towards placing of the implants. Each have their own benefits. Suleiman et al. Had given this beautiful publication wherein the palatal position did not have any significant compromise with regards to longevity of the prosthesis, and it was much more better rehabilitating the for the prosthesis or access during the surgeries. This is again a transentral approach towards a zygomatic uh, implant placement. I have gone through the palate, through the zygomatic complex, through the sinus, and this is the implant that is seen through the sinus approach. There are certain lateral approaches also available which can be used basically to laterally graze through the zygomatic buttress, and these implants basically have the support from the zygomatic bone only. There are alternatives to zygoma also. I have frankly never done a pterygoid implant, but there are reports wherein through the maxillary tuberosity we can anchor the implant within the pterygoid plates, and there are reports where these pterygoid implants are significantly more better compared to a zygomatic implant. Now, there is one of the other cases that I have come across in the literature where the patient was significantly resorbed ridges that we can see because of the vertical height resorption also and excess pneumatization. The aesthetic placement of the implants actually required a inferior positioning of the maxillary arch. So this patient was willing enough and they had done a Leeford 1 osteotomy, got the entire maxilla downwards, done a BSSO also to correct the significant forward protrusion of the mandible, and placed the implants in a matter like this. So what they have done is basically they have done a Leeford 1 surgery, down fractured the maxilla, used a rib graft, and have placed an implants through the rib graft and stabilized all the three with the help of mini plates. Frankly, I have never come across a patient in my practice who is willing to go for such a procedure for implants. But if we do come across, this is a good alternative that can be used. This is the intraoperative picture of the from the same text where they have used and given the implant rehabilitation. These were the previous times where endosseous implants were considered significantly better, but things have changed and I'll show you in some time. This is the same post-operative radiograph depicted where they have done the Leeford 1 osteotomy and done the prosthetic rehabilitation. Horizontal augmentation is again challenging. This is case of narrow maxillary arch which I have done with DO. Now the conventional flap techniques, this is showing the intraoral scan images of the patient, the bite as well. The patient was initially having an FPD which had failed. So this, on further investigation, there was a periapical cyst that was developing, limiting the amount of bone that was available for implant placement. Another challenge that we had, there was practically no bone present in the anterior arch. It was extremely thick. Vertical height was sufficient, but there was almost the entire exposure of the entire labial cortex, which is not suitable. And at the sites available after negating the nasopalatine foramen or foramen, we did not have significant space for the implants. It will go through the defect of the radicular cyst also. So we had planned a two-stage procedure in this case, wherein this is the actual first surgery where we have done just onlay bone grafting with the help of alloplastic bone material, and I had used BioOS and Rocky Mountain bone graft along with a Matriflex membrane to have a good primary tissue closure. This is the second scan where if we were to look, we would see that at the desired size, the amount of bone has significantly enlarged. We did the replanning, we could see good integration and the gain in bone that was evident. The entire implant is now in situ without any exposure on the labial aspects. And again, we had gone ahead and done a guided surgery in this case. This is the basic guided on the day of surgery for the guided placement of the implants. These are the guided implants in place, and that's how prosthetically we had done the case with the help of scan bodies. These are the occlusal scans of the patient, and this is the rehabilitative case. So challenging cases, onlay bone grafting, especially for anterior maxilla, especially indicated when you have an anterior trauma defect, when the bone is less than 5 millimeter in width. So this is extremely useful to learn a trick of you. We can use various tenting screws or meshes to basically help support the amount of graft that we have put on the onlay cavities. One more trick that it's to be always remembered is we should have some amount of bleed coming from the bedside. So we have made, you can make these osteogenic or punches in the bone so that there is blood coming out. It helps in faster integration. This tenting screw basically prevents any displacement of the bone that we have placed at the defect site, and eventually maintains the bone in its place, bone grafts in its place. You can use cancellous bone or alloplastic bones. You can use various membranes to cover these defects. What happens when we have bone more than 5 millimeters? I preferably consider 5 millimeter as the ideal mark when considering horizontal defects. If the defect is if we have 5 millimeter of bone or slightly more, I would go ahead with and do a ridge expansion when placing a bone, when placing an implant. Or we can also think of considering a narrow implant. But if the bone is less or lesser than 5 millimeters, then only bone grafting is what I prefer in my surgical practice. Moreover, whenever considering ridge splits procedures for horizontal expansion, I prefer that it should be a uniform defect, as in it should not have multiple complexities at it, as in the amount of bone is very less at one location and very high at the other, because in such cases cortical fractures are much more common, and we end up without having any bone for us to place an implant. So I prefer onlay bone grafting compared to ridge expansions mostly, but ridge expansions are specifically useful when we have more than 5 millimeter of bones and we can minimally expand the bone and place single implants. The other alternatives to all these procedures are the custom made subperiosteal implants that could be employed where we have significantly resolved ridges. So, away from those reports of doing a Leefort 1 osteotomy or extensive sinus lifts, we can go ahead with custom made subperiosteal implants and give these beautiful prostheses. This is one of my cases which I have used for custom made subperiosteal implant. Uh, this is the case which I am currently working on. This is a case of mucormycosis of the maxilla. The entire maxilla had to be removed. Posterior segment on the left side. This is how it has healed now, and this is his prosthetic phase. So this is the custom made subperiosteal implant that we are planning to derive its anchorage from the zygomatic comaxillary region or malar region as well as the peri-alar region to give the prosthetic rehabilitation. There are reports in literature of distraction osteogenesis which has been used for placement or increase in bone in both the horizontal and vertical segment. These are the examples. It is cumbersome, technique sensitive, but most physiological way of gaining both the bone as well as the soft tissues. At this, I would like to thank you all for a patient hearing. Hope you people learned something from the seminar. I would love your feedback and would love to answer you back. Thanks again to DO Navi. Stay home, stay safe. Thank you.